Syria is located here, an 8-hour flight from Spain. It is half the size and its population concentrates here. Why? Because this whole area is a huge desert, but a very important desert. It has a third of the world's oil and also natural gas reserves. To take the oil from here to Europe, it has to go around this peninsula, exiting through the Suez Channel. As you can imagine, you are charged here. But there's an easier way, a straight line. And whoever controls these oil pipelines can open and close them, like a tap. This area is fucking awesome. The civilization on the planet began in 3 places, and this is one of them. Mesopotamia, here. Sumer, less known, but it's the bloody beginning of everything, also here. Remember the Tower of Babel in the Bible? These guys made it. Egypt, here. It has always been a contact point between East and West, giving Asia access to the Mediterranean Sea. Maybe that's why here the major monotheistic religions were born: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Islam is the last to arrive and actually welcomes the 2 previous. Adam, Noah, Moses, Jesus Christ are all considered Islamic prophets. Okay, let's get to the point. As the area is fucking awesome, everybody has wanted to control it, and it's always been under some empire. Persian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire. Finally, the Roman Empire splits into 2, and only one part survives. This is when the last monotheistic religion, Islam, creates its own empire, the Islamic Empire. Do you remember the Crusaders? Well, they were the Christian Europeans trying to recover this area which we are talking about. The latecomers were the Turks, which, by the way, did not come from Turkey, but from bloody far away in Asia, with Genghis Khan. They conquered the area and founded the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire remained until World War I, so 600 years. When World War I ended, small countries appeared in what was the Ottoman Empire, and for the first time we see Syria on the map. Until then we had just drawn it not to get lost. So who invented these countries? What I'm going to tell you is top secret. Well, it was in 1916. This super secret is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The French and the English government couldn't defeat the Ottoman Empire alone. They could only do it with the support of the people who lived within it, mostly Arabs. So how did they win their trust? They were promised the Great Arabia, a country just for them. There was only one problem: it was a scam. But before we carry on, we must remember one thing. Arabs are a group of people, but not a religion. That means an Arab can be Muslim or Christian, and before Islam, there seems to have been tribes that had Jewish traditions. Well, the Arabs were not given the country they were promised. Instead, the French and British created many small countries. Not your conventional countries, but areas under their control, with rulers set by them. During this time, they pretty much did whatever they wanted with the area. Remember, there is oil. Although Syria didn't have large reserves, it does have easy access to the sea, and France, who then controlled Syria, gives it to foreign companies. After World War II, the Europeans leave. In Syria, kicked out. But just before they leave, a new state emerges: Israel. It's not the time to get into it now, but basically it is a very controversial state whose neighbours don't recognise it. Proof of this is that as soon as the British left, Israel was attacked by these states. From that moment, the area becomes a fucking time bomb. And meanwhile, what about Syria? Well, it's not very stable. They have been constant coups. At this time, an ideology appears in Syria that takes control and spreads across the Arab world: the Ba'ath. This ideology mixes the old dream of a single Arab nation with socialist ideas, and something else that's very important: it's secular, so not religious. Syria and Egypt were unified for a few years by the idea of a pan-Arab state, but that was not so odd. Many countries also tried a union. Remember, these people were promised one country, and that desire had not died. But the union failed. Egypt then convinces them to nationalise oil. Al-Assad, in Syria, the father of the current Assad, became the head of the Ba'ath state. In Iraq, also Ba'ath, Saddam Hussein begins to gain strength. The difference between the 2 countries means Ba'ath parties in other countries become pro-Syria or pro-Iraq. Then the Cold War hits, and the world is divided into 2. Either you support the US or the Soviet Union. The years that followed were full of turmoil, with constant clashes with Israel. They also invaded neighbouring Lebanon. Then an Islamic opposition to the Al-Assad Ba'ath regime emerges: the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, let's go back a moment. Remember that most Arabs were Muslims, right? Well, within Islam there are 2 main branches: Sunnis, the majority in Syria, and Shia. In the case of Syria, despite being a secular state, Assad and the military leaders were Shia, which represent less than 13%, whereas nearly 70% of the population is Sunni. An interesting fact is that the Christians were almost 10%. The fact that Shia control the government and the army pisses off the Sunni population, and this feeling is exploited by the Muslim Brotherhood, Sunni radical Islamists. They took up arms in the city of Hama against the government. Assad ends the revolts at the cost of thousands of civilian lives and putting many people in prison. In the year 2000, Assad dies, and his son Assad takes his place. Due to various pressures, he releases many prisoners, advocates modernisation and the internet, and brings hope for change. There was a period of much political debate, and our opposition appeared, and the Muslim Brotherhood came back. The following years were difficult, and the opposition arrested. Bush then includes Syria in his axis of evil, and this isolates the country. It is simply frowned upon to negotiate with Syria. The Kurds, who lived distributed in several countries in the region, also started to protest. Repression and deaths followed. In 2011, and this should sound familiar, the Arab Spring occurs. What was this? Well, it was protests that spread across many Arab countries calling for more democracy, amongst other things. Even though the Arab world is split into countries, we can see at this point they were facing similar challenges. When it reached Syria, Assad uses his army, and in the clashes some 1,000 people are killed. The fighting escalates until it becomes a civil war. There is no exact start date. The important thing is that today there are many factions in the game. Let's take a look. Remember to note that everything is divided between Shia, the minority, and Sunni, the majority. Secular Shia is Assad's government. He controls all of this, which is basically the Shia area of the country. Assad's government faces the rest. Also secular, but predominantly Sunni, we have the Free Syrian Army. Also we have the Islamic Front, that is religious, along with some other 70-odd more groups. Form a coalition that the media likes to simply call the opposition. Then we have Sunni Islamists, but radicals, al-Nusra, called Al-Qaeda in Syria, because they are basically that, Al-Qaeda in Syria. Other radical Islamists are ISIS, or Daesh. They came out of a spin-off of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They control most of Syria and Iraq, and they have become famous for their horrific atrocities. Their theoretical goal impacts many. It is an Islamic state along Asia, Africa, and the Levant. But this is starting to ring a bell, right? In orange, we have the Kurdish people, that we will remember because President al-Assad repressed them, like other governments from neighbouring countries did. Now, they militarily control this area. Before finishing, let's review the international support as of October 2015. Al-Assad forces are supported by Russia, who already had a military base in the country before the conflict, by Iran and China, all countries that Europe refers to as Eastern. Against Assad supporting the opposition, we have the US, Turkey, France, Britain, and Saudi Arabia. We can wrap up with some conclusions, but I warn you, it's mere opinion. If we recap, we can see that the region is strategic. Because of its privileged location, everybody wants it. Syria has always been under the umbrella of great empires. Think that 100 years ago, France was France, Britain was Britain. But the thing is also 200 years ago, and 300 years ago, and 400. On the other hand, Syria was only Syria from less than 100 years ago, and it's only governed itself for just over 50. Also, they never decided their own borders. They were imposed as Europe divided the Middle East as it wished to control it, designing countries regardless of their populations. Many historians say that a people have to manage their own destiny, but these ingredients we have seen play against projects like the Syrian Ba'ath, who also used repression to stay. Ultimately, it causes a civil war. In this context, it is not surprising that other actors appear to feed on despair, like the Sunni feeling of oppression and the vision of the West as invaders. ISIS, Daesh, uses the Arab identity and mythology of ancient empires. So, when you want to understand the present, ask yourself, what about the past?